We're continuing on with our NHL offseason report video series. Today we're looking at the 25th ranked team, the Buffalo Sabres. What should we expect from them this offseason? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we're continuing on with our offseason plan series, and today we're looking at the Buffalo Sabres. Now, this is a team that's really gone through a lot of transition here. It seems like they've been rebuilding forever, and they're going to go through a very interesting offseason here, in my opinion. They don't have a lot of players under contract. They have a new general manager. We have some interesting times in the world and in the NHL. So I think we're going to see some potentially significant changes with this franchise moving forward, but unfortunately for the Sabres and their fans, they do have, in my opinion, way more questions than answers. So we're going to pose what questions they need to be looking at, but we don't always have all the answers here because there's a lot of ways they can go depending on how the GM wants to go about this. So let's first recap their 1920 season, then we'll take a look at their cap space, what contracts are expiring, and we'll go from there and answer the questions that they need to be addressing this offseason. So first up, let's recap the 1920 season. Now, the Buffalo Sabres finished with a record of 30 wins, 31 losses, and 8 overtime losses for a total of 68 points. The Sabres had another year where they got off to a really good start. Sabres fans were very optimistic. We all were wondering, okay, is this going to be the year for Buffalo? They did this the year before as well, but then they kind of had a reality check, and then they became a very inconsistent, very poor team the rest of the way, and fell far out of the playoffs and came nowhere near making it, even though there was a lot of hope and a lot of optimism early on. Now, the Sabres ended up scoring 193 goals while giving up 215, so not a great differential, but obviously, to be expected for a lower ranked team. Their power play was, kind of okay, 18.9%, 20th best in the NHL, so not terrible, but not great, not quite in the middle of the pack, but getting there. Not a great deal of difference between them and the few teams ahead of them. On the penalty kill, though, they were really bad, one of the second worst here in the NHL at 74.6% for 30th best. So not a very strong point at all for Buffalo. But as they say with penalty killing, oftentimes your best PK person has to be your goalie, and they really did not get great consistent goaltending at all throughout the season. And of course, like I said, the team in front of them didn't really help up the goalies as much as they needed to here as well. But now let's take a look here at a snapshot from capfriendly.com, analyze their salary cap space, and then we'll take a look at all of their expiring contracts, and there is a lot of them. So as you can see here from capfriendly.com, they only have 10 players under contract for next year with $33.2 million in salary cap space. So new GM Kevin Adams is going to have to be busy regardless of what he decides to do here. He's got a lot of flexibility, as I mentioned, which is good in a way, but at the same time, it's a lot of work. They have to decide between a lot of their current players. Who do they bring back? Who do they not bring back? Do they dip into free agency, dip into trades? They need to fill out a full roster here. He's going to have his work cut out for him. He doesn't really have any assistant GMs hired here as of yet. The Sabres owners have been pretty lean with who he's been able to hire since being named general manager. When they cleaned house, when they let go of Jason Botterill and his staff, they let go, I think it was 22 employees total in the front office, and there's only a few of them that have been replaced. So they have a pretty lean looking staff. So they have their work cut out for them, to say the least, and he's got a lot of decisions to make, so be interesting to see which way they go. But let's now take a look at their RFAs and UFAs, and like I said, get ready because there's quite a few to go through. Now, from the restricted free agents, there's a lot of interesting names here, and I do expect a good portion of these to be back. There might be one or two that could be considered trade bait, but obviously within the forwards, you've got Dominic Cahoon. Cahoon obviously is on his third team in 3 years, gone from Pittsburgh to Chicago to Buffalo, but I think he is a good enough player that he's certainly worth re-signing. They've got Curtis Lazar. Obviously, Lazar's bounced around a bit as well, but seemed to do okay in Buffalo in the bottom six role, but certainly debatable. No guarantee he comes back. You got Victor Olofsson, who certainly had a great season, proved to be a good goal scorer, strong on the power play. That's where he got a lot of his goals. But again, obviously a player that's certainly worth keeping around, especially when goals are hard to come by. You have a guy that can score. You definitely want to put him in a position to do so and keep him on your team. You've also got Sam Reinhart, of course, who's been a big part of the Sabres team for the last number of years. He can play center. He can play wing. Depending on where you want him. Do you want him to be your number 2 center? Do you want him to be a top-line right winger? You have the option there. He's a little bit versatile in that regard. Obviously, a really high draft pick from years back. But Reinhart's probably going to be looking for a lot more term this time around if he's able to get it, because he took a short-term bridge deal the last time. So I would expect he's going to be looking for at least a bit of a raise on a longer-term deal. Now, the Sabres also have Tage Thompson, who's an RFA. Again, debatable. He probably could be signed on a short-term contract. Nothing too lucrative, obviously, but Thompson was one of those pieces that came over in that Ryan O'Reilly deal. One of the few pieces that are going to possibly be left on the roster within the organization after this season. You've also got defenseman Lawrence Pilot. Now, Lawrence Pilot, I believe, is already signed to go overseas and play. Like, they were kind of talking with him about re-signing the RFA defenseman. He made it known that he was considering going to play in Europe, and they kind of waited around a little bit too long. So he's technically up and gone, I do believe, already. You've got Brandon Montour. Now, of course, Montour is a pretty good defenseman. I think he's somebody who could be their top trade piece, though. I'm not sure that Brandon Montour really seemed to fit within Ralph Kruger's system. If you look at their other defensemen they have enough other pieces there that he likely could be the guy to go. They have more than enough NHL defensemen to fill out the roster. I mean, could their blue line be better? Absolutely it could. But you've got Ristolainen, who seems to be the most consistently named player in the rumor mill, but he seems to be a guy that Ralph Kruger really likes. So I don't think the odds of him being traded now are nearly as high as they were before. And he also have made enough comments that I think he's okay staying there as well. Obviously, Rasmus Dahlin is not going anywhere. The big-time future of that franchise and their blue line. But between Brandon Montour, Colin Miller, I do expect at least one of them to be gone. And Montour just didn't seem to fit the best. And he could very well attract a pretty good return. I mean, they gave up a first-round pick to get him. I'm not sure they can get that in return, but they can probably get something maybe close. Maybe they get a second-round pick and a prospect. I'm not sure. Maybe they package Montour with something else to try to get another center iceman to play behind Jack Eichel, because that's clearly a big hole in the team. But I think Brandon Montour's time in Buffalo could be coming to an end, and I think he could very well be their most valuable trade chip amongst the players they would consider moving. And of course, you have goaltender Linus Ullmark as well. Now, Ullmark could very well still be that goaltender of the future. Carter Hutton hasn't really worked out. I don't think you can put it all on him, though, for the falters of the team, because the team in front of him hasn't really been great the past couple of years. But Carter Hutton had a good run of about 5 years as a really solid backup goalie between his time in Nashville and St. Louis. In St. Louis, towards the end of it, he was kind of almost platooning as a 1A, 1B with Jake Allen. Jake seemed to do better when he had somebody pushing him and challenging him in that regard, like he had with Brian Elliott. But then when he became the full-time starter in Buffalo on a contract as a free agent, this hasn't really worked out for the best. But Carter Hutton, considering how late he got into the NHL, has kind of carved out a decent career, but I'm not sure he's really going to be there for too much longer. He's got one more year left on his deal. Ullmark still could be that goaltender of the immediate future, at least. And then they do have Ukko-Pekka Laukkonen as well, who could, still project to be that longer-term goaltender of the future as well. So I think Ullmark likely does get signed, probably to some sort of a shorter-term bridge contract. Now, looking at their UFAs, there's a lot up for debate here of who returns. I'm not really sure there's a guarantee that any of them return, theoretically. I mean, if you take a look at what's there's a lot of these players that they're probably quite ready to move on from. Kick things off here, you get forward Wayne Simmons, a veteran guy. Obviously Simmons is a good player. Not the player he used to be, but it certainly can provide, that grit. Play somewhat of a power forward, not the power forward he used to be, though. But I don't see Wayne Simmons returning to Buffalo. There's already been talks about him maybe going to Toronto, but that's far from a guarantee, of course. But Simmons is a veteran guy. Probably he's going to want to put himself in a position to try to win the Stanley Cup, and I just don't see him coming back to Buffalo. But at the same time, depending on what else is out there for offers, it might be possible if they're offering him a contract that he could stay. Obviously, being from the Toronto area, it's not too far from home, could work for personal life. So we'll see, but I don't think the odds are great that he returns. When you look at other guys like Vladimir Savoka, Jimmy Vesey, Gergensons, Larson, Frolik, and Hunwick, I really think there's a pretty high probability that none of them return. I mean, maybe Larson, I don't know, but really for the most part, for the most of these guys, I think the Sabres are definitely ready to move on. Saboka didn't really work out. Gergensen has been underperforming for a long time. VC never really worked out with the Rangers or the Sabres. I don't know where he goes next or what kind of opportunity he's going to have. So I really think that most or all of these guys are going to end up leaving the team via free agencies, see if they can get other deals, or maybe they'll end up playing in Europe. I don't know. I'm not sure that too many offers are going to be coming to many of those guys, at least, in other NHL organizations. So like I said, Kevyn Adams has a lot of flexibility. He could really mold his team to be whatever he thinks it should be based on what moves he can make via trade and free agency. It does have some good prospects in the system, but not nearly enough. So let's now take a look at what are the most burning questions that the Sabres need to look at for this offseason and how to address what moves they need to make to try to be better for next year. One of the top items on the agenda would be the 2020 NHL Draft, where they hold the number 8 overall selection. Again, unfortunately, the Sabres did not have great luck in the draft lottery, but 8th overall in a deep draft still gives you a good opportunity to get a really good player. Now, there's been some talk as well that this draft pick could be a trade bait piece as well to try to acquire another top player who could help with the team immediately, maybe somebody who's on the younger side of things with a decent contract that a team might be looking to move on from. As I mentioned, a couple of the key areas this team needs to address, obviously, to a degree, goaltending is a problem. Obviously, Jack Eichel really just needs some help. Can Jeff Skinner bounce back? Those are all more questions that we're going to look at here too. But obviously, could they move that first round pick to get a top 6 forward to really support Eichel either as their scoring winger or as a number 2 center? That's a possibility they could be exploring out there. There are some big names that are being rumored to possibly be on the move. I mean, look to like a team like Calgary, or the Monahan and Gaudreau could possibly be on the move. No guarantees, of course, but I know the Flames are considering making some changes. I mean, that's just one example. Not to say that there's any direct links there between those two teams, but clearly they have some needs. That pick does not necessarily get used. If they do use it, they could be looking to a guy like Swedish forward Alexander Holtz, maybe a defenseman if either a Drysdale or Sanderson are still on the board. I mean, there's no guarantee they could be. They could look to Yaroslav Askarov, but I think it's probably less likely in their case, but, it's a possibility as well. Maybe a guy like Cole Perfetti, if he's still around, or Marco Rossi. It's just debatable on who goes in those 7 spots ahead of them. Some of those guys I mentioned likely will not be there, and so there's no guarantee that the pick gets used. Obviously, the Sabres could even hold the pick right up until the draft starts, see how the first few picks go. They could have a trade offer or two kind of in their back pocket that they've been discussing. And then, depending on how the picks are going, if the player they want's not there, maybe they make another move. Really, if you think about that first round pick and Brandon Montour, you put those two things together, if they do want to package something up, they very well could land themselves a really high-end profile player. But again, who is going to make that move with the Buffalo Sabres? There's lots of big names that are rumored to possibly be moving this year. So it just depends on who they decide to target and how Kevyn Adams decides to go about his business here. Obviously, is Jeff Skinner certainly a concern. I mean, he came over to Buffalo from Carolina for almost nothing. They really did not give up much of anything to acquire Skinner from the Carolina Hurricanes. He had a phenomenal first year, and not final year of his contract that he came with. Scored 40 goals, and then he got signed to this massive, lucrative long-term contract, and he really poorly performed this past year, only scoring 14 goals when the NHL season was paused. Now, of course, if he was able to play a full 82-game schedule, that still would have put him on pace for around 19 goals, so it's still half of his production from a year previous. So I know part of that, I don't think he played with Eichel quite as much this year. So to a degree, that could be part of it. But still, Jeff Skinner has scored 30 to 40 goals on multiple occasions at the NHL. He should be able to drive more of the play with his ability to skate and carry the puck. And he should be able to put up more points regardless of what line he's playing on. And he kind of proved this year that maybe, given the situation, that maybe he's not able to do that as much as they thought. And that contract could become a real albatross here in the not too distant future. But can he bounce back and get back to, even if he's not a 40-goal guy, can he be, a 30-goal guy even? Because they need the goals from Skinner's stick to pay him $9 million per year. They clearly overpaid a bit to keep him in Buffalo. I think they felt pressure to do that after how things went. Obviously, there's a season that, they didn't do well as a team. They had a guy put up 40 goals, and obviously they didn't want to get the lambasting from the fan base to let a 40-goal guy walk. And, they overpaid, and now it's not looking good. But there's still a lot of time. He's still young enough that I still think he can bounce back. But the question is, can he get it done and become a more consistent scorer like he was for most of his career in Carolina? Now, one of the other big questions here as well is, can some of their youth actually make an impact? Can Casey Mittelstadt take some steps forward with his development? I mean, I think to a degree you could argue maybe he was rushed to the NHL a little bit too fast, but I know they envisioned him as being that number 2 center behind Jack Eichel really for the past couple of years, and that has not worked out. He has not been capable of taking on that role. I know there's been times when he's been in the NHL, he's been more in the third line, and that hasn't really worked the best either. This past year, he spent a lot of time down in the minors, kind of working on his development, and his time in the American Hockey League did seem to be somewhat productive. But with having such a long layoff and having the Sabres not be part of that return to play is certainly debatable on how much development and strides he's made in his own personal game. Obviously, getting bigger and stronger is certainly going to play a role in his ability, I think, to perform better at this NHL level as well. But Mittelstadt's development here is going to be key for the Sabres. I think if they go another year here and they don't see much of a gain, they very well could look to move on from him. Obviously, they have Dylan Cousins as well as their top pick in last year's draft. There's still some debate whether or not he'll be a center or a winger at the NHL level. Very productive junior player. Pretty good chance, assuming that the World Junior Championships take place this year, that he can play a big role for Team Canada, be one of the top scorers on that team, which could be a good confidence boost for him if everything goes well. And maybe he could join the team possibly even as early as this year, because if the season's delayed until January, he could very well have some time to play games in junior or within the World Junior Championships before the season even starts, and then join the Sabres afterwards. So it is possible he could see NHL time this year and still do that, but it's just debatable what's best for his development. If the Sabres don't feel like they're going to be making significant strides this year, maybe it's best that he wait a year before making his NHL debut. But either way, Cousins could be a big part of their future, and it's just a matter of making sure they do things right with his development, because they don't need another situation like they have with Mittelstadt, where he's behind the 8 ball here in his development, where they thought he was being an impact player, before this, and he still isn't yet today. So what moves do you think the Buffalo Sabres are going to end up making? Can Jeff Skinner bounce back? Will that first-round pick in Brandon Montour be trade bait to acquire some good players? As I mentioned, new GM Kevin Adams has his work cut out for him. He's got lots of flexibility, but a lot of decisions to make on who returns, who doesn't, and then they need to go shopping for some players, whether it be through trade, free agency, or promoting players from within. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.